Hey everyone, Intern here. I just wanted to go over the Devourer, Scarred, and Annihilator talents, as well as the class tree that got released with the alpha yesterday. Um, just gonna go over this pretty casually. Obviously nothing tuning wise is final, so I'm just gonna be talking about design and what I think might blend together or might work. Starting with the class tree actually, just because it's the base for our class. Importantly, Voidblade is up here. Otherwise, there's not really much changing as far as the Demon Hunter tree goes. Basically, half of our tree is gone. Uh, all the capstones are gone. The hunt got sent to Devour and Havoc, so that's important. Um, but there's not much we can talk about here, just because basically anything that got removed is now a not yet implemented talent. So, um, but obviously we'll still have Citadel of Misery, things like that. Some of these parry talents, I mean, you'll never take. Um, but we'll see if these get changed. I wouldn't be surprised if the Demon Hunter tree got pretty overhauled pretty soon. Devour, we got Void Ray. This is our I Beam. This is our Fury Spender outside of Void meta. Um, and then while in Void meta, Void Ray basically flips. It reduces our Fury drain while in Void meta, since Void meta we're always draining Fury, and the goal is to stay in it for as long as we can. Um, but Void Ray flips, doesn't consume any Fury. And then we've got stuff like Soul Immolation, just basic Fury gen, and some Soul Fragments. It's like Imma Aura, but it's not doing damage to any mobs, it's just damaging yourself. So purely for just resource generation. And then we kind of have a Destro Lock similar thing with they have with Havoc and Mayhem, where you could have a reduced cooldown on this while getting an additional charge, or it just might proc at random while you're doing rotation. I think 5% seems a little low for something like this, especially if you're going to give it another charge and reduce its cooldown by such a large amount, that it might go either way. But my initial thoughts is that it's going to lean in toward just Tempered Soul until Spontaneous Immolation gets a little bit of a higher chance. Because I like the idea of Spontaneous Immolation, but it might need a higher chance to proc for it to see a lot of play, unless I'm totally wrong. Nothing, I don't have alpha, I'm not able to test these things currently, but hopefully soon. And then, like I said in my previous videos, this left side of our tree here, this is where our melee stuff is. We've got Sunder, which is a really strong defensive. Um, do some damage equal to your missing health, and then healing you for 50% of your missing health. That's a massive amount. Especially the lower in your health that you go, and you can kind of play it how you see fit, of seeing if you can like kind of toe the line of like, how low can I go before I'm like, yeah, this is probably a good Sunder here. Um, but either way, you're getting a good amount of health from this. And then we've got Hungering Slash, Void Step, and the Hunt. Hungering Slash happens every time you press Void Blade or the Hunt, and this is just a slash in like a circle around you. It's a cool scythe, looks cool, does some damage. And then casting Hungering Slash, if you take Void Step, lets you Vengeful Retreat out, which I would assume you're always taking this because the gameplay loop is nice, being able to come in and out like that. The Hunt, this is the same exact Hunt as you'd see in Havoc. The only change is that obviously it's interacting with Hungering Slash and Devourer's Bite here, where the target takes increased damage from you for a small amount of time. But the big thing is for Havoc, the Hunt heals you for 10% of the damage you deal to your target. This is 25%. This, to me, seems like a massive, massive amount of sustainability for an ability that traditionally doesn't have a super long cooldown, about a minute 30. And then our middle part of our tree here this is where your Collapsing Star stuff is. The Apex talents are surrounding Collapsing Star. This stuff's surrounding Collapsing Star. Even though the Apex talents are surrounding Collapsing Star, I'm not totally convinced that you're always going to be going down the middle here, simply due to
how this works in Felscard, which we'll go over later. But Collapsing Star, they're really setting this up to be this massive, massive button for Devourer. 20% damage gain, 15% every time you cast it. Collapsing Star generates soul fragments, which leads you to your next one. And then this one actually has nothing to do with Collapsing Star. However, this is a big talent that I think is going to impact Mythic Plus and Raid. Simply due to the fact that one of these is very geared towards either Raid, but also high level Mythic Plus, and then the other one is just generally for Mythic Plus, at least that's how I see it. Emptiness, this ramping haste buff inside of Void Meta not only helps you maintain Void Meta uptime, it very much is seeming to reward you for it's very much seeming to reward you for having that uptime and being able to stay on a target for as long as you physically can, which is something that's very prevalent in all difficulties of Raid, but also high level Mythic Plus. And the biggest thing I think I can compare this to is Eye of Kazan from the Liberation of Undermine Raid, simply because this trinket was good on fights that were 5 minutes or longer in Raid, but also it was pretty much considered dead for Mythic Plus until people got to really high levels of Mythic Plus and figured out that, oh, if we just chain pull and stay in combat, this trinket will stack fully, and it was so incredibly strong in high Mythic Plus because you could keep it stacked for so long. So I think Emptiness is a very similar effect to that. And this isn't to say that Soul Glutton is bad or is poorly designed. I actually really like the idea of Soul Glutton, of really reinforcing this pack to pack playstyle for Mythic Plus, or potentially a raid fight where you're. I think Forge Weaver Raz could potentially be a good example where you have these pockets of ads coming up where you could have these short bursts of void meta and then come out of them, because I mean your fury is draining so much faster if you take Soul Glutton that it's very much reinforcing this either pack to pack or just really short void meta windows that bring you back into your regular form. And then if we move over to the right side of the tree, this is very much geared towards Void Ray, which is definitely filling a niche that I really wish that Havoc had at some point, which is amping up I-Beam to be this major part of your damage. And while I-Beam is good, it's only considered this like massive damage button if you take Blind Fury. If you don't take Blind, even if you have Looks Can, like, well, it's gone now, but Looks Can Kill was this talent that it made every tick of I-Beam crit, and that's just gone. It's not a big deal, but the main point is that I-Beam was only this major damage button if you took Blind Fury, and that was just mostly an AoV anyway. And like Isolated Prey is the same way. Um, but Void Ray is getting these empowers, these amps in the tree. Like you have Void Ray just flat 15%, gain 20 Fury, which is very valuable inside of Void meta. So this could potentially be worth picking up even if you don't take the talents before it. The damage of Reap, it's kind of in this, in that sort of vein where like, and there's this moment of craving where Void Ray, the next Reap is reset. So you're kind of weaving between Reap and Void Beam like that. But then our capstone here, fully channeling Void Ray causes your next Reap to deal cosmic damage to all enemies within a 25-yard cone in front of you. My biggest thing about this is that I really, really, really like is that the one thing I was worried about when we got early footage of like basically just the trailers for Devourer and they were really hyping up Collapsing Star. Don't get me wrong, I think Collapsing Star is incredibly cool. I'm very excited to play with it. And like our Apex talents are dealing with that. And keep in mind, you probably will take them, but my point is also that Blizzard has said, I believe, that you don't have to take the Apex talents if you don't want to. So if your build is completely ignoring Collapsing Star, which it probably shouldn't, but in this theoretical world where Collapsing Star is poorly tuned, even in Mythic Plus, let's say I take 1 point in Collapsing Star, and let's say I still take my Apex talents, there is definitely a world where my Mythic Plus build can either be this melee hybrid. I take my melee hybrid stuff, and I take this Void Ray stuff for just this barrage of I'm coming in and out of melee. I'm reaping. I'm using Void Ray, and then I just have this massive cone in front of me. It just boom, 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 and I don't have to take the talents in here that are more caster oriented to enable that sort of hybrid gameplay that I think Blizzard is looking for. Because there is a totally real world where for Mythic Plus, where I still just ignore all of these melee talents, and I just amp up Collapsing Star as much as I can, and also take this Void Ray stuff, and maybe I don't even take Eradicate here, and I just focus on amping up Collapsing Star as much as I can, and then my build is just centered on these giant bombs in AoE, and I think there's just so much potential here for different builds as long as things are tuned correctly. And then as far as our other talents go in the middle here, nothing super crazy. Um, generating soul fragments passively and building towards void meta out of combat is really big, especially for Mythic Plus. And that's kind of what I was talking about with Soul Glutton. Um, I'm not a big fan of this talent simply because it's the same problem with Isolated Prey, that talents that only give you a buff when you're hitting one thing just don't feel very good. Um, they just it just makes your talent point budget really weird a lot of the time. Feast of Souls is just this, so when you consume a soul fragment, you gain some damage. Great, a little bit more duration on that. Cool. A big thing with Rolling Torment, because I initially wasn't super psyched on this because I didn't think it was enough of a damage amp for enough time. Because keep in mind, because this is 12% damage for 12 seconds upon entering Void Meta, and it reduces over the duration, presumably 1% per second, since it's the same duration as the amount of buff that you're getting. And obviously, they're not the same spec, but Havoc has Inertia, which is 18% for 5 seconds, and it's able to do a lot in that time. Collapsing Star is unhasted, I think, like a 2.5 second cast. So let's assuming, let's assume it's a 2 second cast. Because your Apex talent lets you use Collapsing Star as soon as you enter. It lets you use a Collapsing Star as soon as you enter Void Meta. Okay, let's say it's a 2 second cast. Like I have enough haste that it's a 2 second cast time. I'm burning 10. I'm burning 2% of this buff just casting one spell, and then it's 10%. But that's just when I entered Void Meta. So I don't feel like this feels very good unless you are playing Soul Glutton, where theoretically, I'm playing Soul Glutton, and I don't care about how long my Void meta is lasting, because I want to get back into Rolling Torment, and I want to press Collapsing Star with my Midnight Apex talent buffs. Where I'm going all the way down here, I'm grabbing Rolling Torment, I grab 20% crit damage, because Collapsing Star is always going to crit, and my entire build is centered around, I go into Void meta, and I potentially don't even use Void Ray while in Void Meta, because the only reason I'm in Void Meta is to get a Collapsing Star off that crits. It does 20% extra crit damage. It does more critical strike damage based on my crit chance as well. My mastery increases my. There's so much amplifying stuff towards this Collapsing Star because it is this massive, massive button that is my build, and I think while that on paper might not seem like I might seem like I'm going all over the place with these sort of build ideas here, I think that's a good thing for Devourer, because I think the biggest problem with when Evoker came out was that not augmentation. I think augmentation it's not good to compare things to, but devastation. The tree, obviously, this is the War Within, but in Dragonflight, devastation basically they had a blue build for raid, and then you had your red build for Mythic Plus, and then that was it. That was what you did, and there wasn't much variance at all. But regardless of tuning, I think there is a lot of potential here for different builds and potentially different builds that do different things and are competitive with each other that allow people to, hey, let's say I'm a Shadow Priest player and I want to try out Devourer and I'm not a melee person at all. I don't have to take a single one of these melee talents to be competitive in a theoretical world where these things are tuned correctly. I can just take all my collapsing star stuff. I can take all my stuff on the right side. I can take my, you know, crit damage and all that fun stuff. And I don't have to touch a single thing about, I don't have to touch Voidblade ever. I don't have to touch any of this. And I think it's really going to, I don't think it's going to separate the player base, but I think it's going to create two very distinct types of Devourer players where you'll have a lot of people that come from Havoc and maybe they want to see like I think it's the Devourer player base. I think has the potential to be very distinct from every other sort of like ranged and melee, just from how unique that we're talking. Even unique from Evoker, which is another mid-range class. Um, I just think there's a lot of potential there. And then moving over to Scarred. Moving over to Scarred. I was actually incorrect about my guess in one of my previous videos because my guess was that Void Surge / Demon Surge would trigger on your target instead of yourself due to the range restriction. But actually, Scarred is purely only able to be played if you are running your melee talents. And when you read the first talent, you might say, "Oh, well, I don't need to take the hunt." Um, let me find it. Yeah, entering Void meta resets the cooldown of Void Blade and the hunt. Scarred is entirely based around this sort of melee hybrid. And I think that's the reason that's really exciting is that when we were initially learning about Devourer during Gamescom, I think the general perception was that ranged was going to be the raid build, melee was going to be the Mythic Plus build, and that's just it was going to be very static, and that's just how it was going to be. This is basically saying, and unless we have like a fate-bound assassination rogue situation for most of the expansion, or you have like the situation where like one of your hero talents is dead for an entire expansion or an entire season, this could potentially enable a melee hybrid build for raid, which would be very, very, very exciting because of this sort of gameplay loop that is being enabled by not only just having these melee talents, like having Void Blade and interacting with Hungering Slash and things like that, but meta resetting stuff and meta empowering things and having, outside of um, meta buffs that Felsguard already had, um, but mostly just the fact that there is potential to play this hybrid melee build in raid is very, very exciting. And I think it's going to need a lot of testing, and especially with the change of Void Ray / I-Beam applying Student of Suffering, I think that gives um, a lot of credit to the build I was talking about, where I'm taking full left side, full right side, and I'm ignoring collapsing star buffs while still taking the base talent and having just my damage come from this way more rapid style of gameplay, and having those moments in Void Meta where I am casting collapsing star, but a lot of my damage in Void Meta is going to come from Void Blade, Hungering Slash, the Hunt, stuff like that. And then otherwise, these three talents, the three extra nodes, those don't exist yet. They do for Annihilator, which consume as a 35% chance to grant one stack of Voidfall. Upon reaching 3 stacks, you summon some meteors. Great. Pretty simple. Pretty simple. Your builder stacks, your spender, reap, uh, summons the meteors. Pretty cool. Pretty basic stuff like Void Ray generates a stack of Voidfall. I'm really hoping that by what they mean by fully channeling Void Ray means that you are doing the full 2.6-second cast and not just spending it with a low amount of fury to get the stack. Because I don't want to run into issues that like Devastation Evokers had in the past where they will clip Disintegrate. That hasn't felt very fun to me in the past. I know some people like it. I'm not a huge fan. But then there's just some basic stuff like stacks of Voidfall grant some haste. They gain some, reduced damage taken, which if you're at 3 stacks, that's 6% DR, not bad. Seems a little low, but movement speed and then shift being our, I think of it as like Door of Shadows in terms of verticality, but it's like a dash. It's not a blink by any means. Like we're not going to be able to blink through Dimensius rings or anything like that. Um, Resetting the cooldown of Reap upon activating meta, cool. 3 stacks of Voidfall. Um, some similar stuff. Generating Fury. The big one here, passive bonuses granted by each stack of Voidfall persist for 12 seconds after being consumed. This one I like a lot because it's making it's making your DR better, it's making your haste better, it's making you faster. If you're taking Path to Oblivion, if you don't think you need that extra shift charge. Which I think you always take the extra shift charge if you're playing Annihilator, but that's just me. And then this, I know it may seem similar to Isolated Prey, but I think stuff like this in Hero Talents is fine because this had to happen with Fellscarred because there were issues with it not doing much damage in single target, so they had to, add deals 50% increased damage on the 6 for single target. This kind of stuff isn't a big deal because it's not taking up talent points. It's not taking up valuable talent space. And then, your first collapsing star after entering demon form causes a meteor shower, just some extra amp for collapsing star. Nothing too crazy. And then your capstone, the third Voidfall meteor strike called down in sequence is larger, has 50% increased area, deals 100% increased damage, and generates 2 lesser soul fragments. Since our meta doesn't have a cooldown, I'm assuming the second half of that is specifically for vengeance. This seems really cool. It seems pretty simple, and this definitely seems more geared towards like a caster. Because we're not interacting in here with any of our like Hungering Slash, nothing with Void Step, nothing with the Hunt. Which the part I like about Annihilator is it's not barring you from using those. Um, it might be better. It likely is better. Again, this assumes a perfect world of tuning. If I'm playing Annihilator, and if I'm playing Annihilator in Mythic Plus, I'm probably just running as much Collapsing Star as I can, and then this right side. I'm probably ignoring all my melee talents over here, and that's fine. But nothing's preventing me from doing that besides tuning. Um, and Scarred is definitely, Scarred is forcing you into that Hungering / Void Step stuff. But I think this is fine because it still has an option for people that there is still an option for people that want to just sit back as far as I can anyway, since mid range, and just cast. They're not being forced to run any of this melee stuff, so there's not that big of a deal of them just taking some talents in here rather than having to run this stuff. And I think that's a really nice part about Devourer. And I think it being simple helps too because it's likely from other hero talents that this will be iterated on as time goes on. Just like Eldraki Reaver was very unpopular early in the expansion, and now I think it's honestly, the preferred hero talent for most, if not, I would say for most Havoc players. Um, but I think we're working with some really good stuff here, and overall, I think Devourer, at least talent wise, is in actually a really good spot. My only real complaints are for talents. It's these 2-point nodes that only serve to take up talent space by doing something that's not interesting. I don't have a problem necessarily with things that are helping to reinforce a build and to help the tuning of a build, like Void Blade Hungering / Void Step damage. That stuff I'm fine with. This stuff I don't mind. Same with like improving Reap because I'm going into Eradicate and that's gonna buff my big Reap cone. That's fine. The ones I have issue with are these two and this one. 4%. If I am spending 2 talent points to get 4% haste while in void meta. Haste is great, but if I'm spending 2 talent points for this, why am I not just spending talent points down here and then taking emptiness for the better scaling haste amount? Like, what is this? Isn't connected to, I mean, the only reason I'm connecting this is, okay, if I take Void Rage, the only thing I'm connecting this to is up close, which I also connect with Hungering Slash, which is required for the melee build that this talent is supporting anyway. So Void Rage doesn't make a ton of sense to me unless it's like a talent like Scars of Suffering or Demon Hide that are just strong enough tuning knobs that you just have to take them because you'll just do 3% less damage if you don't take Demon Hide, or you'll deal 4% less damage if you don't take Scars of Suffering because it's just 4% versatility. So, but these talents too, they're in a spot where they're getting connected to things that are just generally useful. Blind Fury is just a good talent for Havoc, and Demon Hide is in this bracket partially because it needs talents to be able to spend points on that get you to this next part. Because most Havoc builds are running, you go I-Beam, Burning Hatred, if you're, and this assumes you're running Eldraki Reaver. So you're running Burning Hatred, you get Accelerated Blade, you grab Deflecting Daze, First Blood, Netherwalk, and then you ignore these three. Well, I still need to spend another talent point. Oh, okay. I'll just take Demon Hide because I get 3% magic damage. And then I get down here. This makes sense. This makes sense. This does not make sense to me. 4% haste for what? To be connected to what? This is a dump point. Same with Beckon. Your chance to shatter a lesser soul fragment from enemies, your damage. Your chance to shatter a lesser soul fragment from enemies, your damage is increased by 2/4%. I think WoW just didn't type this in correctly, but it's in the same vein, and same with Sweet Suffering. This is not increasing the buff, as far as I understand. This is not increasing the buff of Feast of Souls. This is just 2 points to increase the duration of the buff. And while this has a little more grace than Void Rage does, why am I spending 2 talent points on this? Unless it's that strong that I have to, why would I not just want to, as again, perfect world tuning, why would I not just spend these points on taking 1 point to increase my Void Ray damage by 15% and then get Void Glare Boon? These points just seem so out of place, and I would really like to see them either become 1 point nodes, as they should be, or they become just things that are just more interactive in the first place. I think we've covered everything Devourer related. And while I did not get Alpha on this first round, I'm hoping to get it soon. So hopefully I get lucky and then I can test out some Devourer and then I can stream it. And yeah, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.